Hello to you and welcome. I'm Ben Thompson. We start this hour with news that the UK has confirmed it's supplied Ukraine with long-range cruise missiles. They are known as Storm Shadows. They have a range of up to 560 kilometres. That's about 350 miles. They can only carry conventional warheads. Well, they were designed to target infrastructure like command centres or bridges or other strategic targets. It is understood to be the first time that Ukraine has been given such weapons. There have apparently been assurances that they would only be used inside Ukraine's sovereign territory and not inside Russia. Here is the UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace making that announcement in the House of Commons.
In December, I informed the House that I was developing options to respond to Russia's continued aggression in a calibrated and determined manner. Today I can confirm that the UK is donating Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. Storm Shadow is a long-range, conventional-only precision strike capability. It complements the long-range systems already gifted, including HIMARS and Harpoon missiles, as well as Ukraine's own Neptune cruise missile and longer-range missions elsewhere gifted. The donation of these weapon systems gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves against Russia's continued brutality, especially the deliberate targeting of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, which is against international law. Ukraine has a right to be able to defend itself against this. The use of Storm Shadow will allow Ukraine to push back Russian forces based within Ukrainian sovereign territory.
Well, that's the UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace there. And just a quick update for you regarding that expected so-called Ukrainian counter-offensive, that summer counter-offensive. We've also heard too that the founder of Russia's mercenary force, that's called Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, claims that Ukrainians have begun a counter-attack that approaches the hotly contested town of Bakhmut. Well, Mr. Prigozhin has called it partially successful. We should say at this stage the BBC hasn't been able to verify that claim, but it gives you a sense of what might be going on right now on the ground, particularly relevant, of course, given that announcement from the UK Defence Secretary over that provision of longer-range missiles. Well, let's speak now to the BBC's Russia's Sergei Goryashko, who's in the capital of Latvia, that is Riga. Sergei, good to have you with us. And so that announcement that we've had from the UK Defence Secretary, an important one. And if you look at some of the words spoken around it, suggesting that the UK will not stand by while Russia kills civilians, he says this is a calibrated and proportionate response. Those are the important elements here too.
Yes, totally sure. However, we still have questions how exactly this missile could be used by the Ukrainian army, as the only plane which can carry those is the Su-24. Ukrainians have them, but in limited quantity, and so therefore there are questions whether the effectiveness of this weapon would be as high as anticipated. Meantime, the Kremlin has just promised an adequate response to that decision of the UK Defence Ministry, but they did not specify how exactly Russia would respond on this shipment.
Yes, and that important line in the announcement, or that expectation that these would only be used in Ukrainian sovereign territory. So the point there to make that this would be purely defensive, not offensive.
Yes, of course, and this is really important for both for the UK and for the Ukrainian government, because in case if those missiles could be used for offensive operations on the targets inside Russian territory, Russian territory in its borders of 1991, that could be looked at as an escalation of the conflict, as a help with the offensive on the Russian soil, and this could lead to a response not to the Ukraine but to the UK. So it's really important that UK Defence Ministry is underlining this, and again they are. As it's seen in Moscow, they're trying to show that they're not helping Ukrainians with any offensive operations, but only with the defensive ones.
Yes, and the important point too was that Ben Wallace suggesting that these are not in the same league as some weapons that Russia is using, but at the same time saying Russia must recognise that it is their actions that have led to this point whereby the UK is providing these weapons to Ukraine. So there will be nervousness, as you've touched on, about ratcheting up tensions on both sides and assisting Ukraine without wading into the war too much.
This is correct, and moreover, if this awareness has first emerged in Russian government when there were first big shipments of HIMARS rocket launchers like a swing. So first Russia says that the shipment of any sort of Western weapons, it could be considered as the direct involvement of the Western countries in the war, and Russia would respond to them as to the parts of the conflict. And second, usually either the Ministry of Defense, either President Putin himself says that this is some sort of an old missile, old weapon, old machinery just being shipped to Ukraine from the Western countries, and Russia doesn't bother with those. But the situation on the front line shows otherwise. And it's, for instance, like the Patriot complex shipped from the US has shot a Russian missile, a Russian hypersonic missile, which was before considered to be like unstoppable.
Sergei, it's good to have your thoughts there. Sergei Goryashko there in Riga for us from BBC Russian. So let's talk a little more about what we've heard so far this morning, that the UK will provide those longer range missiles to Ukraine. A little later we'll hear from a former British military intelligence officer over the significance of that provision and where that takes the so-called spring offensive, that Ukrainian offensive to take back a large part of the land that is currently occupied by Russia. So we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But before that, let's hear from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's been speaking to our correspondent Hugo Beshega in Kyiv about the provision of weapons from the West. The president has been saying there has been a significant delay, and that could affect the fight back of Ukraine against that Russian invasion. Take a listen to what he was telling the BBC's Hugo Beshega.
So, Mr. President, I've been here for a few weeks, and I think almost every conversation I've had has touched on the issue of this much anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. Are you ready for this counteroffensive?
Mentally, we're ready. In terms of how motivated our military are, we're ready. In terms of enough personnel in our brigades, we're ready. In terms of equipment, not everything has arrived yet. That's my answer.
So you're still waiting for weapons and for the kind of military equipment that have been promised to arrive?
Yes, we're still expecting some things. They will reinforce our counteroffensive. And most importantly, they will protect our people. We're expecting armoured vehicles. They arrive in batches. We can advance with what we've got, and I think we can be successful. But we will lose a lot of people. I think that is unacceptable. We need to wait. We need a bit more time.
Let me talk about something that happened last week, because Moscow accused Ukraine of trying to assassinate President Putin. Was Ukraine behind that alleged attack?
No, clearly we were not behind it. They're always looking to do something that would look like justification. You do this, and we do this in response. But it didn't work, not even for their own people at home.
So who was behind it?
I think they did it themselves. It was their launch. There were no victims and no one was wounded. Nothing happened there. What happened there? What kind of magic thing was carrying bombs? Why did it fail then? No one was killed. Everyone was safe and sound, and so on and so forth. That's why they did it themselves, absolutely. I'm confident of this.
And next year is an election year in America, which is your main ally. And
I can't vote. I'm a citizen of Ukraine. I can't say who I'd vote for.
But apart from that, are you concerned that depending on who is elected, you could end up losing this support from your main ally?
Складно сказати, чесно. Завжди будь-які вибори.
It's hard to say, to be honest. Elections and internal processes always affect any country, especially if we talk about elections in the US.
Ну, по-перше, ми з вами...
First, I don't think we will lose bipartisan support. And second, US elections are taking place in a year's time. Who knows where we will be? I believe we will win by then.
Я вірю, що ми вже переможемо.
We're here in Kyiv as Eurovision is happening in Liverpool, in England, and you were supposed to be hosting it here, but you can't because of the war. How disappointed are you that you cannot host it?
Я дуже поважаю Британію, суспільство і...
I have great respect for the United Kingdom and its society. It's an amazing country. From the very start, my opinion has been that if we can't host Eurovision, it should take place in one of the countries that share a border with us,
як Словаччина або Польща,
such as Slovakia or Poland, or any other country which our people can reach easily, something nearby.
So that's the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky speaking to our correspondent Hugo Bishega. So as promised, let's get the thoughts now of Philip Ingram, who's a former British military intelligence officer. Philip, thank you for joining us. Let's start at the beginning because we've got through quite a lot in the last hour in terms of what the UK will provide to Ukraine. They are called Storm Shadow missiles. What are they?
The Storm Shadow, it's an air-launched cruise missile that is pre-programmed on the ground, can fly very accurately following map of the earth technology up to, well, beyond 250 kilometers. So that brings the whole of occupied Ukraine into its range. And it has got a warhead up to 450 kilograms, which the UK versions of them have got bunker-busting warheads on them so that they can go through reinforced concrete and destroy whatever's needed inside.
And so what does that tell us about what the potential targets of these missiles could be?
Well, what this allows the Ukrainians to do is to start to prepare the battle space for their counteroffensive in a much better way that they're doing. So they can target the Kerch Bridge, which is an important logistic link between Russia and Crimea. It was badly damaged by an attack last year, and the Russians are only just repairing it. It can attack Russian logistic bases inside Crimea that are there supporting Russian activities inside the eastern part of Ukraine. It can attack Russian command and control and airfields as well that are supporting Russian operations inside the eastern part of Ukraine. And all of this will be done as part of the shaping the battlefield, shaping this area before the Ukrainians launch their primary ground offensive. And that stops the Russians from being able to react in the way that would cause that excessive number of casualties that President Zelensky mentioned.
And talk to me about the significance of what we believe are the terms and conditions attached to this deal, in which these missiles will only be used in Ukrainian sovereign territory. That is an important caveat to this deal, isn't it?
It's a very important caveat. And I think President Zelensky and the Ukrainians realize how important it is that their weapon supply from the West is maintained. And therefore, they will operate the weapons that are supplied to them within the caveats that have been given to them, because they know that if they operate outside that, the West will know about it. Our intelligence is very good indeed. And it would risk that wider weapon supply. So they'll not do that. They'll play within the rules.